It's been almost 15 years since he was in the Ontario Legislature as an elected Member of Parliament, but that didn't stop Premier Kathleen Wynne from tapping his shoulder to lead an expert panel on Ontario's skilled workforce. Today in conversation with Sean Conway. Welcome to Algonquin College's Pembroke Campus, Sean.
Delighted to be back to this gorgeous facility, and on this summer afternoon it shows particularly well.
It's been 13 years since you left office. Of course, you were a Minister of Education, a Minister of Colleges and Universities, so you were always paying attention to the labour market. But boy, has Ontario changed in that window.
Very different place today than it was 15 years ago. And when I think about the Ottawa Valley in which I grew up, how much additional change, nowhere more so than we've seen in our local resource economy. Areas like forestry today, much more mechanized, different kinds of products, different markets. So when Premier Wynne asked me to head up this panel, she basically gave us a mandate that said essentially this: take a look at where we are in 2016, looking to the future, and particularly what are the impacts of technology and changing demographics, particularly our aging population, going to have on the kinds of policies we need to ensure that we've got the right kind of labor force for the world into which we are moving, and moving quickly.
And you got an earful when you started to talk to Ontarians and talk to different business sectors.
We certainly did get an earful. We got an earful from business, from students, from academics, and from communities. But we heard a lot of very good things. We heard, for example, that while it is not as strong a recovery as we'd like, our manufacturing sector is seeing in certain sectors, in certain areas, some upticks, some resurgence, and in communities, and I can think of one where we were in Simcoe County, north of Toronto, and one of the things that a couple of companies said to us, we're now noticing post-recession that with an increase in our orders, and that combined with a growing loss of our older workers to retirement, we're having a challenge finding particularly the skilled people that we need in certain areas of advanced manufacturing. And again, there it was a combination of, we went through a terrible recession from 2007 to, in some cases we're still in it quite frankly, but certainly 2007, 2010. And what that tended to hide was the fact that our skilled workforce in many sectors was aging and was getting to the retirement stage. So we found that there was some good news in that area. We're finding students, young people have different expectations, as all teenagers and young adults do. They're much more tech savvy. They are looking now, for example, at the financial sector, the banking sector. Here's one example, Jamie, that I remember. There are almost 400,000 jobs in financial services in Ontario, many of them in communities like Pembroke and Renfrew and Barry's Bay and Eganville and Deep River. But we're finding that younger people don't go to the bank like their parents or people like I do still. That technology is having a real effect, both in creating new opportunities, but threatening some long-established jobs in certain kinds of physical structures that are being rendered obsolete by technological change. One final thing I would point out that's a real issue for Ontario, and we are here in the beautiful Ottawa Valley on a summer afternoon, but the reality is that the growth in Ontario is overwhelmingly skewed to the Toronto-Hamilton area. That if you think of Ontario as a table, it's now tilted in a way that it's never been tilted in my lifetime. So there are a lot of places in Ontario where the population growth and some of the economic growth, much of the economic growth, is quite static. And so what do you do in places like northwestern Ontario, where, for example, fastest growing population in the country are young Aboriginals? How do we adjust to those people? How do we bring young Aboriginals who are very substantial in number now? How do they get an opportunity to share in the post-industrial economy that so many places in Ontario and Canada have today?
Certainly the mandate was around demographic shift and the advancement of technology. And you came out of this report, you and your panel, with 6 key recommendations. The first one I want to focus in on is the whole theme of partnerships and local leadership and the important role that plays in advancing Ontario's economy.
Yes, and just to get right to that recommendation, what we saw and heard in positive terms is that where there is success in strong links between the labor force of today and tomorrow and particularly the educational institutions in that sector or in that community, it's because there are strong local or sectoral partnerships that bring the key players together. We told government, listen, government plays a critical role in this. Government has to set the right policy. It has to ensure that it funds in ways that are appropriate, but it has got not the central role. The central role, in our view, are these partnerships that bring communities together to assess what their particular needs and opportunities are. It is no secret to tell your audience that Pembroke is not Toronto. Windsor is not Haileybury. Cornwall is not London. So we recommended that the government take a look at what we call the several Ontarios and try to nurture an environment where very strong but locally based, regionally based partnerships can take root, and that really does call on communities to in many cases get more serious about labor market issues. We've often tended to think it's somebody else's job. It isn't. Where you see success, it's people in the community, leaders in the community, leaders in business, leaders in labor, leaders in the not-for-profit or other parts of the economy locally come forward and say, we are going to do things differently. To do that, by the way, and this gets to a second recommendation, we were told in too many places that we as community leaders are flying blind, figuring out what the labor market demand of the future is in our area. And quite frankly, the state of labor market information in Ontario and in Canada is well below where it needs to be. The governments of Canada and the several provinces have got to clean up their act and generate and make available to communities. They don't have to get into all the specifics, but you should be able to, in Pembroke or Renfrew or Eganville, to be able to pull forward some information that says, we're in 2016. Here is the best information we've got from employers as to where the economy is moving. You know, what made Wayne Gretzky a great hockey player? He wanted to be where the puck was going to be, not where it was now. And we really felt strongly that we have to improve the labor market information so community leaders can take a look and say, here is where the demand is going to be. And by the way, there needs to be good alignment between that demand and the capacity of particularly our educational institutions. The other part of that, by the way, is, and I've got to be careful because my late mother would not be happy to hear me say this. She was a teacher, but parents also have to understand that the world is changing. And we ran into circumstances where kids would tell us, students would tell us, well, we really did have an interest in the skilled trades, but there seemed to be some family bias, there seemed to be some community bias against that, and there's sometimes bias in the school system against that. You know, one of the things that we don't do, and we talked in this report about alternate pathways, you want a good career in business? I know of no better way to succeed in business than to take a skilled trade, but we don't do a very good job as parents and as community leaders in saying fast track to business success is often a skilled trade. My example is this. In 1957, I think it was, a fellow named Frank Stronach emigrated from, I think, Austria to a place called Kitchener, Ontario. I think he was 18 years of age or thereabouts. He had an overnight suitcase, as I remember the story, and I think a tool and die certificate. And within a generation, he built one of the enduring multinational corporations that employs thousands of people in Canada and around the world called Magna. Frank Stronach didn't go to a fancy business school. He made his way, as so many people do, and not at that level, because he started out as a skilled tradesperson. But we've got to do a far better job of making the connection between, for example, pursuing your interest and your skill in the trades and what that can do if you're interested in business.
You've blended nicely into the Ontario College system is about to celebrate its 50th anniversary. Bill Davis and John Robarts, of course, the former Premier of Ontario, brought that forward back in 1967. And your report certainly speaks a lot about that interconnectedness that colleges, it's really in their DNA around providing workplace experience. And you want more of that in your report, you're suggesting.
Yes, and good for Mr. Davis, and I hope he's watching this because we've had our debates across the way, but the Davis legacy in community college is a tremendous benefit for Ontario, and we heard all kinds of very positive things about the colleges, especially because at the beginning, the colleges had it baked into their mandate that they had to reach out to their communities and to their, to their sectors, their business sectors, and create the links and hopefully maintain them. And generally speaking, that has happened. Universities were never expected to do that, and we basically are saying in our report the universities have got to up their game. They've got to learn to do what the colleges have done. Universities shouldn't be colleges, but there are lots of people in the arts and science faculties at the University of Ottawa, the University of Toronto, and at Nipissing who are also thinking about their careers, and quite frankly, the universities have not done as good a job as I think they could have in linking those people, those students of theirs, with opportunities in various areas. That's why, for example, we've strongly recommended not just partnerships, but much more emphasis on mentorship and on experiential learning. What's experiential learning? Well, it can be everything from a paid internship at a university or a college to 5 or 6 sessions with somebody who lives in Pembroke, who's a retired business person, a retired labor leader, somebody who had great success as a diplomat, as running a not-for-profit, as a farmer, and would be very happy, if asked, to sit down with young people to talk about his or her career, the success in that career, and what advice they would give to a young person from Waito Station or Loxley who was thinking about maybe going there. We don't do that nearly well enough. We don't give it the emphasis that I think it requires. One of the things that struck me and many on our panel, it was a 5-person panel, but if you, and I know you're in this category, if you follow sports, in many ways, sports provides a very good roadmap. I mean, what do we do in the Ottawa Valley when somebody, comes home from the hospital as a newborn with a good sporting tradition in the family? I can tell you, a lot of coaches will quickly tell you, oh yes, there's another Giesebrecht, there's another Bramburger, and those kids are, that's bred in the bone. And we tend to have all kinds of processes. We've got coaches who are looking for talent. Once they identify the talent, they encourage the talent. The whole community gets involved in that. That is a good thing. We need to do that kind of thing in identifying young people who are thinking about their future employment. I've seen it in my own area here, and I don't want to get any more specific than that. I used to work in the sawmills in the summertime, and I remember working with very talented people. And the tragedy often was nobody told young Johnny or young Mary, you're really good at some things that matter for this company. Oftentimes young people need to hear that. And then once they hear it, then they need to be, as they would be shown in hockey or soccer or basketball, a roadmap to get from here to there being perhaps an opportunity to seek full or part-time employment. So the colleges, in our experience, have had much more success in developing and maintaining these relationships. But having said that, again, our report was, where's the puck going? We are seeing very significant technological change. There's a report out of the Ryerson Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship a couple of weeks ago that says something like 40% of the current jobs are going to be threatened in whole or in part by technology, and soon. The news today, we're taping this in late August, the news today is out of places like the University of Waterloo, rapid progress is being made on driverless vehicles. Let me tell you, I don't think it's coming as quickly as some of the advertisements would have you believe, but it's coming. And ironically, one of the hardest positions to fill in the economy of Ontario today is long-distance truck driving. And I think I can understand why. If you drive particularly the 401 and 4-lane highways or bigger highways, I wouldn't want to be doing that job either. Well, it may be that technology is going to have a solution in whole or in part for that. And let me also make a point that we discovered, and this is directed at elementary and secondary education and the Ontario government. Ontarians are not doing well enough in their mathematical and technological skills. We're okay, but we're not as good as we need to be, and in some areas like math, actually we're starting to slip a bit. That cannot be tolerated in the world of 2016 and 2020, 2025. We are simply going to require better technological literacies to function in not just the economy, but in society. So we made plain to the government of Ontario, you're going to have to watch very carefully and improve some of the pedagogy around mathematics, because it's slipping, and that's a very worrisome sign.
I want to just pick up a little bit on the experiential learning and mentorship recommendation that's been made. One of the things that really caught my eye was this suggestion that all high school and all post-secondary students would have a co-op or some sort of experiential learning experience. So you're saying 100% across
Yes.
the board, you want them all there to have that opportunity.
Absolutely. And I know it's an aspirational goal, and there are reasons not to do it, but we heard it from students, we heard it from employers, that there are few things, oftentimes there's nothing, we were told by people in the know, that is a better training for not just the hard skills, why is math important, but the soft skills, working together, sometimes with difficult and creative people, sometimes in stress, that experiential learning, actually work-related learning. Think about it, Jamie, when you were a teenager, we can imagine in our creative minds what something like might be. I'll never forget my first 9-hour shift at a sawmill. If you'd ever told me that 9 hours could be that long, I would not have believed it. And I think of the things that I learned with my friends growing up in West Renfrew County in the 1960s and 70s. I didn't think I was learning very much. I was learning a lot of important things. So yes, we are saying that you shouldn't be able to graduate from an Ontario high school without at least one good experiential learning opportunity. And we imagine that across a continuum. They're not all going to be of equal kind, simply because if we were told in Northern Ontario, or you could do certain things in Pembroke, it's going to be a lot harder to do those kinds of things in Stonecliff and maybe in Calabogie. So you have to be realistic, but there are all kinds of good examples of how you can do that. One of the good opportunities would be, again, back to mentorship. People don't often realize how many really interesting, talented, and successful people live in their neighborhood and live in their street. And we're saying that in those circumstances, an opportunity might very well be you, sir, or madam, are going to get to spend 3 or 4 afternoons over the course of a fall term listening to Jamie Bramburger and how he got into a very successful career in radio and other kinds of journalism and later at college administration. Young people need to hear that. They need to understand that there's a great story about the actor Ryan Gosling growing up in Cornwall, Ontario, and how he was mentored by an uncle who had an Elvis act. Now you wouldn't think that was exactly but I think he was 13 years of age when he was hauled off by the uncle to have a non-speaking part at, I think, the Cornwall Mall on a snowy afternoon. What he realized that first day that he stood on the stage with nothing to say was there was a magic in that moment that spoke to him, and he's apparently done not too badly.
He's done okay.
It's turning on that switch and across a wide continuum. And again, I say to communities, leaders have to step forward. Who in this community across a wide range has had an interesting experience that in their later life would be happy to share with young people? Something as simple as that can be, listen, I ended up in politics because I spent a lot of my teenage years with a very active 85, 90-year-old grandfather who'd been in politics. I didn't think I was learning anything. I just traveled around with an interesting old man, and apparently something happened. Whether it was a good thing, I will leave to other people to judge.
The promotion of multiple career pathways recommendation, there are things in there that talk about providing more opportunities for guidance counselors in the high school system for professional development.
Yes, and we recognize that guidance at the high school level is difficult. I mean, there are issues with maintaining the cohort. We are also saying that it's not just responsibility of the school, that we think a good local community-based partnership should also build into its mandate outside of school counseling and mentoring in exactly the way you would do it in the appropriate sports examples that we talked about earlier. But again, if you think about the new economy, many more young people coming through Fellows or Bishop or Mackenzie or Valor or Opeongo or Madawaska are going to be actually working for themselves. They're going to be creating their own businesses, or they're going to be getting together with some of their pals and creating a little company. Entrepreneurship, innovation. What's that all about? Well, I'll tell you what that's about. If you're going to be an entrepreneur, if you're going to be an innovator, that's about risk. That's about failure. I can tell you, I teach in a couple of Ontario universities. There's pretty strong middle-class values these days that work against failure. Parents, and I don't blame the parents. My parents, I know what I was like as a teenager. I certainly didn't plan to fail. But some of the great successful people, Warren Buffett, one of the great investors, one of the most successful investors in human history, says failures are his best teachers. So, but that's a different kind of world. I can tell you, I teach people, and if the kids are prepared to run the risk of failure, I can tell you their parents aren't too interested. A lot of time and money has gone into getting that child into that program. So we're talking about alternate pathways that encourage people to think about what kinds of activities, what kind of education is required to stimulate their interest in innovation and entrepreneurship. And to state the obvious, how many times do we see people that are 15 or 16, and I think of people a little older than that. Mark Zuckerberg was at Harvard University. Harvard wasn't going to keep him. He had an idea that became Facebook, and he was on about that. Well, that's often the way it is with successful entrepreneurs. They're not going to sit in a traditional harness, which I kind of enjoyed. I spent half a lifetime in school. Innovators and entrepreneurs, not so much. So this gets difficult. It gets difficult for parents. It gets difficult for institutions. It gets difficult for communities. What is it? It's like looking at Winston Churchill's father was once asked to summarize the career of a very successful British Prime Minister, Benjamin Disraeli, under whom Randolph Churchill worked, and he said, "Oh, that's easy. Defeat, deadlock, defeat, draw, deadlock, total and absolute victory." The victory came at the end.
An interesting pathway.
Well, it is a pathway. And how many people do we know that have had very major success, but it didn't come at the beginning? Sometimes it didn't even come in the middle. That's about creating environments where you believe in yourself, you're resilient, you know how to manage failure. And that's what we were talking about there, especially in areas like innovation and entrepreneurship. Again, I go back to that story about that young actor, Ryan Gosling. He was, I think, 13 years of age when he said to his mother, "This is what I want to do." And interestingly, his mother, and ironically, the Disney Corporation, which had a school for these teenage kids, there was an accommodation for that. In that case, he was right. In some cases, it won't turn out nearly that well, but there has to be more than one pathway, especially, again, when we look at young Aboriginals. And one of the things we were told in this review by the Ontario Ministry of Finance, I want you to just listen to this number. According to the Ontario Ministry of Finance, all the net growth in Ontario's labor market for the next 15 or 20 years is going to be a result of immigration. Because that goes back to the demographic change.
Birth rates.
Our birth rate is below replacement, and now, believe it or not, the baby boomers are retiring, and they're going to be retiring in significantly large numbers. So it won't be the same everywhere, but overall, the province, we've got to get this immigration piece right, because if we don't, then we're going to have to revisit a whole bunch of things here. And we've also hopefully got to make sure that immigrants just don't do what they'll often do, which is congregate in the big cities, Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal. We've got to make sure that the rest of the province and country can share in that population growth, if at all possible.
And no question, the demographic shift is being very profound in smaller regional communities. Strategic investment in human capital. You also have a recommendation here, and you talk about franchising successful in-house training programs that are developed by larger employers. That's an interesting concept.
Yes, because what we saw is that, again, and here I'm going to have to be a bit critical of business. Many businesses treat developing talent as a very high priority. Other businesses, not so much. And we've said, listen, business has got to treat human capital like it treats other investments. In fact, you can have all the good plant and equipment, but if you don't have the people to to manage those assets, you're going to be in a very tough spot. The Europeans, quite frankly, if you look at the Europeans particularly, but even the Americans, on average, Canadian business investment in human capital is not where it needs to be. Having said that, there are a number of large organizations, large companies that do it really well. What our recommendation about the so-called franchise model, and we recommended a couple of very specific examples to the government, they should take a look at some of these very successful training models that people like Siemens Canada has, and see whether or not they can be scaled across, for example, a group of small, medium-sized enterprises in certain sectors or in certain areas. Because the reality is, it's harder for smaller companies to do what some of the bigger companies can do. So we think that the so-called franchise model might be a way to do that, and we've given some very specific recommendation based on some work that's actually currently going on between actually the Government of Canada and a number of companies and educational institutions in Canada.
Final recommendation talks about skills and competencies and about Ontario developing specific skills and a competency framework. Talk about that.
Yes, we often, almost always think that when companies or employers advertise for a job, that they know what they're looking for, and they have an ad that is very plain about what's required. But when you look at a lot of those advertisements, or when you look at that whole question generally, what you find is that in the last number of years, particularly as a result of more and more education, formal education, what we're advertising for are credentials. Thou shalt have a diploma from a community college, or a certificate, or a degree from a community college or a university, assuming that that credential also contains the competency. Well, increasingly, we're being told not so fast. And one of the areas, well, there's more of this out there than you might imagine, because Company X hires young Conway. Well, Conway's been to a whole bunch of universities and he's got this very fancy resume, but it turns out that he may have lots of paper qualifications. He's very difficult. He can't get along with people. He doesn't know how to relate with people. If it's successful, he's very happy. If he's not doing well, he's impossible to manage. So the competency question is, how do we assess what many jobs really require? And it's beyond just paper qualifications. This is the area of soft skills. It's the ability to problem solve, the ability to bounce back after some adversity. It's the ability to work with a group of people, some of whom may be a little difficult to get along with. And that's what we meant here, that there are many, many people out there who have all the things you're requiring, but they don't get credit for it because they don't have the credential. They have the competency. We're saying to the governments of Ontario, the provinces in Canada, we've got to do what a lot of other jurisdictions are doing. We've got to start evaluating competencies. What do we mean? What do they require? And does Mary or Johnny actually have those? Because credentials that don't take account of competencies are often what leads to the skills gap. I hired Conway, and yes, he had the credentials, but he didn't have the competencies. And it also means that employers have to think through about what they're really looking for. Does the job advertisement fairly reflect what you're looking for? And by the way, have you looked at your own group? This is often the case with women. I mean, I saw it in government. There are a whole bunch of places in government when I started out 25 or 35, 40 years ago, where quite frankly, the one indispensable person was the executive assistant to the deputy minister. And you know what, she really ran the place, but if you actually today held her, quote, credentials up, she couldn't actually apply for a job that she's doing by all accounts splendidly.
I think we should wrap this up with a couple of final points in this. One of the things when your report was released, Premier Wynne was by your side and talked about this will not be a report that collects dust, which I'm sure is always a concern by someone who's put in a lot of labor and work into this. So where do we go from here with the report? And talk about measuring success, which is really, I think, the panel's way of saying we need to be accountable on this.
Yes, we certainly said that the government right now, not just provincially but federally, there are some programs that need to be renovated, but you can't renovate until you've got better data. Our report and our experience suggests that, quite frankly, the performance in some of these areas is not what it needs to be, but you need to have better evaluation. And certainly going forward, you need much clearer benchmarks for what it is people who deliver programs and design them are going to be held to account for. And that's one of the reasons why we strongly recommended that over the next year, the Government of Ontario undertake a number of pilot projects in areas like experiential learning, in areas like partnerships, in areas like alternate pathways, to actually get some very good, up-to-date, made in Ontario or made in Canada experience that allows you to hone right in on what precisely are those benchmarks, are those metrics that you need to say to Conway, here's the standard you have to meet. Right now, I would not be very happy to recommend proceeding on the basis of some of what we've got, because quite frankly, on some of the key performance indicators, they're just simply not good enough. And in some cases, they don't appear to exist.
When I looked at your report, and we've just really scratched the surface, the headlines, if you will, there are a number of action items below that. How confident are you that this will come to be?
Well, I think quite confident, because I don't think we have a choice. I mean, we know that we've got a lot of very good paying jobs in this country for whom we now don't have all the required talent, apparently. And if you think our challenge is bad, the Americans are even worse in a good way, in that they've got millions of high-skilled jobs that are going without domestic candidates. So that's the other threat. Canada, and Ontario, we better get moving on this, because if you think the Americans are here just to poach those high-quality co-op grads from the University of Waterloo, they'll soon be here in Pembroke and Kingston and Chatham, Ontario, grabbing talent. There's some evidence that they're already doing it. There is a very real pressure that we're going to have to meet. And I would say, again, to finalize this, is I'm sitting in Pembroke, beautiful Pembroke at Algonquin College. We have got a great community college here in the Upper Ottawa Valley, well supported by the community, good links into business and others in the area, good secondary schools. But we need to up our game as well. What is the nature of local community engagement really? How good are those partnerships really, looking at 2030, not 2010? And that's what we need to do. And as we're seeing with sports franchises in Boston, which I understand you have some interest in, you can rehabilitate. You can go from just average to winning the league and winning the prize, all to say that maybe the Toronto Maple Leafs are the exception to that rule, but for all those Leaf fans out there, I'm hopeful that after 50 years of drought, maybe they too have figured out the way to win. And again, the Maple Leafs are a good example. It's not for lack of trying, it's not for lack of resources, but for whatever is going on there in that franchise, they can't seem to make it work. I think you look around other communities, and I look here, and I think one of the great developments since I retired from politics 14 years ago is this fabulous campus. But it's not just physical bricks and mortar. It's about community engagement, and it's not just business, it's educators, it's labor, it's the not-for-profit sector, it's looking at the community, looking at the region, recognizing Pembroke, Eganville, Petawawa, Cobden, Beachburg. This is not Chatham, it's not Windsor. There are going to be some specialized opportunities and challenges, and it's to understand those. You need better data than we've got to get community leadership and engagement and sustained over time. I think if we do that in places like Pembroke, I think we've got a very good future.
Well, that sounds like a good way to wrap up this interview. Always an interesting conversation when we get together. So thank you very much, Sean, for taking the time, and we'll look forward to seeing where this report heads. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sean Conway, the chair of the Premier's Highly Skilled Workforce Panel, which has released its recommendations recently, and now time will tell what recommendations will be implemented as we try to build a stronger Ontario workforce. I'm Jamie Bramburger. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.